Be sure to stay to the end to see our garden tour. Hey friends, happy Sunday. How are you? It's Lisa from Life with Faith, Creative Vermont, a podcast where I talk about creativity, spirituality. We talk about knitting, a lot about yarn, especially in the winter months, but anything that is creative and kind of the purpose of this podcast, or how I wish to connect with you in this podcast, is to share with you the ways that I'm creative and how important creativity is to me and to my well-being, in the hopes that all of us can lean more into this deep and important aspect of ourselves, where we can, by leaning into our creativity, we can become happier, more productive, have more meaningful lives, and have more fun and peaceful, more balanced lives. Because the truth is that we are all creative beings. And when we don't give that aspect of our life enough attention, we can have we can have problems, we can have unhappiness, we can have imbalances in our mood and in our personalities that we may not attribute to the fact that it's just because we're not expressing a major part of ourselves. So I hope that if you enjoy this podcast, if you're new, I welcome you. If you are someone who comes back and checks in with me from time to time, I welcome you back. And for anyone who enjoys this podcast, I encourage you to please like and subscribe. I'd love to have you as part of our community. I so enjoy your comments. I love to hear from you, and I love to see that people see the video. So this is really, this is a passion project. It's a way for me to express my creativity, and I hope that it touches you, and I'm so happy if it does. So today I wanted to talk about, there's a video, I don't know if you have seen this video, by this musician called Mikey Parker, who created this video. He's a great musician. I really like his work. I will see if I can figure out how to link it in here. But he created this video called Arise, and it's about vulnerability, and it takes place in New York City. And it's a really interesting experiment. He has people standing on the streets, people who are willingly doing this, of course, holding up signs in which they share their deepest, darkest fears, the things that they don't want people to know about themselves. They put them on a sign and they hold it up on the streets of New York City, and people can see them. And so, for example, there's someone who puts up a sign that says, I'm 50 years old and I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Another person holds up a sign that says, I'm afraid I don't make a difference. Another person holds up a sign and says, I don't know how to love another person. Right? So there's these it's like really, really powerful, because by looking at people who are holding up these really deep and personal signs, we see our humanity in each other, right? Each of us we may not be able to fully identify with the entire statement, but we can identify with an aspect of it, right? And it also gives us permission to kind of feel the things, or say aloud the things that we are most afraid to share with others. And I just think it's like it got me thinking about vulnerability. There's different kinds of vulnerability, right? There's physical vulnerability, the fact that we will get sick and we will eventually die. There's, which is really, most of us do not allow ourselves to accept that thought, even on just, an occasional basis. We kind of live in denial of that fact. And that creates, a whole, I love to be healthy, and I think being healthy is amazing. And I think that it's really important to think about your health. I think it's a really good, thing to do. But we see people who are so fixated on their health, It's almost like they believe that they can overcome any illness or that it's almost as if they're invulnerable to death, or that, that kind of thing. And that's not, it's not healthy when it gets to that point. And then there's emotional vulnerability, where we feel that we might be judged or we might be rejected, right? For what we're feeling, or the thoughts that we have, and things like that. So it got me thinking about how emotional vulnerability plays into creativity. So I wanted to share with you, of course, I love poetry, and it actually made me think about poetry. Poetry is vulnerability. It's revealing truth, right? In a way that we all can connect with, because it's part of the human experience. But truth is vulnerability, right? By saying the truth in a moment, we risk a lot sometimes. And the willingness to kind of risk that it gives other people the willingness to risk their truth. And so by opening more and more truth, we have more meaningful and real relationships with others, right? So I'm going to share with you a poem by David Whyte. And this is kind of more of like what I would consider a meditation on vulnerability rather than an actual poem, but I think it's really, really good. Vulnerability is not a weakness, a passing indisposition, or something we can arrange to do without. Vulnerability is not a choice. Vulnerability is the underlying, ever-present, and abiding undercurrent of our natural state. To run from vulnerability is to run from the essence of our nature. The attempt to be invulnerable is the vain attempt to become something we are not, and most especially to close off our understanding of the grief of others. More seriously, in refusing our vulnerability, we refuse the help needed at every turn of our existence and immobilize the essential, tidal, and conversational foundations of our identity. So I'm going to stop right there because it goes on. But I think that is such, what I love about that poem is basically it's saying that vulnerability is the truth, and it's not saying the truth, but that we are vulnerable, that we are mortal, that we are going to fail, that we are going to get rejected. We are all going to have our heart broken. And by acknowledging that reality, it's so freeing. It actually helps us to breathe into the moment that we're in right now and kind of appreciate the preciousness of that moment. So when you're thinking about creativity and you're thinking about even just, the small ways that we're vulnerable with our knitting, for example, we may be afraid to fail. We may not try a project because it just seems like it's going to be too difficult. And we don't want to fail. We don't want to risk that vulnerability. And so we don't do it, right? And it could freeze us, and it can make our lives rigid. It can make us less creative. But the truth is that, I find that all the things that we're vulnerable, that we feel vulnerability about, when we flip it, we can actually find the truth somewhere, right? So there's the fear of failure, right? And then when we lean into, well, what is fear of failure? What is that about? It's like, okay, but what is the truth? The truth is that we fail every day, all the time, in many, many ways, right? We make mistakes. We misjudge things. We say the wrong thing. We do this all the time. So we're fooling ourselves into thinking that we don't do this, right? And so by pretending that we don't do this, then we don't take risks, and we don't take on projects. We don't do knitting. We don't do these things. So we are limiting ourselves. We're hurting ourselves. We're making our lives less interesting, less full, less meaningful by being afraid of something that's going to happen anyway, right? It's like that expression, don't worry about what people are saying about you. because they're going to say it whether you worry or not, right? People are going to judge us whether we can't prevent that. People are going to judge us. They're doing it all the time. We make judgments about other people all the time. The truth is that none of those judgments really matter to who we are and what we're going to be, right? Only if we let them, only if we allow them to freeze us in our, in our inactive state. So I think that it's so amazing, vulnerability. I think it's an amazing thing to think about. And I wanted to show you, I have some thoughts here, but I wanted to show you, isn't this gorgeous? This book that my son got me for Mother's Day. It's a journal. And it's so beautiful. I love it. It was at our local bookstore, which I love, Northshire Books here in Manchester. I just love the colors and the embroidery on the front of it. So beautiful. And I thought it was such a thoughtful gift for him to give me. And I just love I love the colors of this embroidery. Kind of like, it's like something you'd almost want to hang on the wall. It's so beautiful. Look at those beautiful colors. I don't know. So I have some thoughts here about vulnerability and about different things connected to that. If I could just find my glasses now. Where are my glasses? Here we go. So this is going to be a vulnerable podcast because I make mistakes all the time. Just full disclosure, all the time. In my knitting, in my life, all the time. So, okay. To be not being vulnerable is a myth, right? If we are human, we are vulnerable. And to pretend not to be vulnerable is to be out of step with life. I thought that was like one of the thoughts that I had that I just think is, so being out of step with life is this is where, I think when we're not creative, when we're not acknowledging the things that are important to us, we start to get out of step with life. And when we become out of step with life, we lose touch with our happiness, with our essence, with all the things that make us feel connected to the earth and to each other and to our lives. So, so just think about vulnerability. Vulnerability does not mean walking around sharing your deepest fears with others. You do not have to do that to be vulnerable, but you can acknowledge your deepest fears to yourself. And when you're with others, you can be aware of your feelings about something and the truth of something, and you can stand in that truth, and you can engage with others from that place, which I think will be really enriching to your life. And also, when you are being a creative person, when you are thinking about creativity, it's really important to think about your vulnerabilities and what it is, how fear might be holding you back from what you want to create. So I wanted to show you this really cool thing. I don't know if you can see it. I have a little gardening video I'm attaching in here. Let me see how there's a trick that you can do where you move something. Okay, so I'm gonna move it nice and close. This is a stick that I found out in my garden. Isn't that gorgeous? This is, I was like, what is this? I saw it and it looks to me almost, the patterns are so beautiful. They're so balanced and structured, and it looks like something that someone created, right? And I was like, what is this thing? I was so blown away by it. My husband was like, oh, this is what happens. We have some trees in the back that, obviously there's worms in the soil, and this is made by worms. Isn't this the most amazing thing that worms make these designs? I don't know. I'm so blown away by that. And, you know, this is just something that, you know, the more time I spend in the garden, it like fills me, right? It fills me and it gives back to me. Not that I'm always just constantly giving to others, but we are generally always, like as adults, as women, as men too, depending on what we do, you know, and in our jobs, we are giving to others. We are caring about others, we're thinking about others, and we don't often, especially if we do creative work, if we are making things, if we are mothers, if we are with our families, we're doing things for others. And it can feel depleting at times. And I think it's really important. I had talked about gardening last episode, how gardening for me is a way of kind of fueling creativity and inspiration. That was that we talked about inspiration and finding inspiration and how nature can fuel inspiration. And so you can look back on that video if you haven't seen it. But I was thinking more about it, and being in the garden actually, like something like this, right? Finding this and just thinking about it and seeing something so beautiful, and it gives back to me in a new way. It's like it gives something to me that feeds my creativity in a new way. I take that, I mean, like this pattern, right, would be an amazing pattern, you know, to incorporate into knitting, right? It's like so beautiful, or something like it, right? It's just, it's like this flow. We're always in the flow of life, and it's really important for us to find ways to step into the flow and to be an active member of the flow, an active part of the flow. We're always in the flow. The flow is always happening, right? And, you know, it's like, where's the flow? When's the flow happening? Well, the flow is always there. And it's just in every moment we can lean into the flow and we can be a part of it and we can be fed by it. We feed it and we can be fed by it. And for me, being in the garden and having my hands in the soil and doing all of those things and seeing the growth of plants, that feeds me and then inspires me. Seeing flowers inspires me. It reminds me just of how things are constantly ebbing, how things are changing, right? Change is constant, and we cannot cling to things hoping that they never change. So we might as well step out into nature and be a part of the change and feel how our physical bodies are literally part of that change. We have, you know, I was listening to something this morning by Jack Kornfield, and he was talking about how, you know, on our eyelashes are billions and billions of small bacteria and creatures that live on our bodies, that we're covered actually in, you know, microorganisms or biomes, that the lining of our stomach is recreated every 7 days. The lining of the liver, I think, is recreated every 10 days. Our eyebrows completely regrow. I think it's every 4 months, right? So we are evolving all the time. We're constantly changing. And to hold on to a belief that we're not doing that is just, it's not true, right? And so the living outside of that truth you can feel how restrictive that can be. And somehow being in nature where we see this constant evolution and we see that we are part of that constant evolution, and it feels like a bigger thing than we are. It feels like it feels bigger than we are, and it feels bigger than our problems. And so, yeah, and that helps us to feel more free, more balanced, more truthful, and more relaxed. So I encourage you to find your way at connecting with the flow of life, whatever that is. And I'd love to hear it. I'd love for you to share it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Namaste.
Here's my favorite flowering plant here in the garden. Just starting to get some beautiful blooms. It seems to be covered in, well, it looks like a pollen. When you look closely at the leaves, it appears to be covered in like a, almost at first glance, it looks like a mold, but then when you rub it away, rub at it, it comes off. I love this flower. I love peonies, of course, because they're so beautiful, but to me, I'm just pulling up some weeds around it.
Sorry, I told
you
I make mistakes.
One of the things I love about gardening so much is that it teaches us about resilience. This plant has been through so much. I don't know when it was planted, and all you have to do is give it a little love, and it just continues to bloom. And even without that, it continues to bloom. But when you just go in and maybe take away some of the weeds that are taking some of its nutrients, I've been giving it a little bit of bokashi water. It just is blooming so beautifully. And I found these when I was removing some invasive species from these trees here. I found these amazing pieces of wood. This one's not a good example. Let me get this one out for you. I don't know if you can see it, but it has...
Here I am making another
patterns
mistake,
on
but
it.
like I said before, it's not about perfection. It's about taking a chance and sharing something with others. This is the stick that I was sharing earlier in the video. And so I have a much better image of it, and I'm walking around trying to get a great view, but the light was just too bright.
I don't know if you can see it. It has these like amazing patterns. And my husband was saying it's the worms that go through the decaying wood. And it's like, you can hear the church bells. I think it's better in the shade. And I just think it's like such a beautiful metaphor for what I love about the garden, which is that it's a combination of like life and death. And that may sound morbid to some, but it's reality. That we are always, there are those of us who are being born, there are those of us who are dying, and it's all part of the circle of life. And in the garden, they live off each other. You can see it, right? The decaying soil becomes compost. And here's this beautiful rhododendron that year after year blooms. Oh, look, my neighbors are back. Year after year blooms. To just hear the beautiful sounds of children's voices in the morning. It blooms year after year, and yet it gets nothing. This year we're going to give it something. I'm giving it a little bit more care, and I'm giving it we're going to cover it, and I'm also going to give it some bokashi water. I have been giving it some bokashi water, but it's the point that I was making, or what I was saying, is that it's life and death all in one place. Here we have these hydrangea plants that we planted and did not make it through the winter, which we really should remove. I'll show you what's going on in here. And what I'm doing is I'm just in the walkways. I'm just I pull weeds and I leave them, and then I cut, and then these pine leaves that come from this tree here, they just fall over the garden. And there's this so sweet children running through the field. And they just create kind of like a compost that that nourishes the soil, right? As it decays, it creates a richer, deeper soil for the new plant life to grow. So for a long time, I was just trying to constantly put in wood chips and figure it out. And now I just pull the weeds, I put them in the walkway, and I let it be. So here we have, this will be filled with, I think we're putting cucumbers and zucchini. Here we have our potatoes, which are doing really nicely this year. We're doing them in containers rather than on the ground. Here we have some peppers. And over there we have more zucchini. Over there we have tomatoes. Lots and lots of tomatoes. Oh, we're going to put lettuce. Lettuce goes in here. And let me show you the greenhouse. Going into our greenhouse. Here's another view of our flower garden here. And it's so beautiful. We have so many blue flowers right now. We're gonna put some flowers in that old wheelbarrow. It's amazing. We had rain and cool weather, and so we have tons and tons of weeds. And oh look, my nasturtium are coming in. I'm gonna hang these. Here we have flowers. I have larkspur, colossum, coleus. I have dragon, snapdragons. Here it looks like we have some vegetables happening. I'm not even sure. These are lettuces. Something else growing here. I don't even know what's growing. I don't know what this is. My husband comes out and does it. Here I can recognize lettuce. And here's obviously some tomatoes. So I love this little greenhouse. It was very inexpensive. Got it from Amazon. And it just provides a really nice place because here in Vermont, we have, a short growing season. So this allows us to just continue. I'm going to keep tomatoes growing in here as it gets colder. And it provides this perfect little spot to constantly transplant. So it's just so beautiful to be in the garden. It's so grounding and nourishing to the soul. And the ongoing cycle of life. We're so blessed to be able to be a part of it. And we all can participate in it, right? We can all do a little bit of gardening wherever we are. It doesn't have to be perfect. It does not have to be gorgeous and beautiful. It just has to be our little part of the earth.